Aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It is Friday, July 12th, 2013, end of the week. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Pow Hana Friday, going into a weekend which may or may not be relaxing based on the outcome of the Zimmerman trial. The jury just came back from lunch break. They are about to get their final instructions from the judge before they wander off and do what they're going to do. The outcomes are conviction for second-degree homicide, conviction for manslaughter, acquittal, or a hung jury, and we are still seeing all over the net all of this fanning of the idea that if Zimmerman is let go, there have to be riots, we're going to get Whitey, and we're seeing this head of the new Black Panther Party, not to be confused with the original Black Panther Party, is out there saying we're going to do it right this time, and they're just trying to sell this whole idea of race hatred in the United States because Washington, D.C. wants you to hate your neighbor and not hate the government because, hey, it's worked so well so many, many times before. So more evidence continues to surface that the U.S. Department of Justice fanned up this whole kerfuffle in the first place, spending thousands and thousands of taxpayer dollars that they've admitted so far and who knows how much more covertly to just sell this idea. This is all about race. It's about race relations, you know, the whites against black, even though Zimmerman himself is actually Hispanic. And a reminder, right now, the Obama administration could really use some kind of a domestic crisis, at the very least as a distraction from Floodgate, from the economy, from the wars, which are not going very well. We're going to be talking about that a little bit later in the show. And, of course, where they get really out of hand, he's got his tailor-made excuse to declare a national emergency, start gun confiscation, take control of all communications, all these little emergency executive orders that are already signed and just waiting for the president to say, yep, we got a national emergency. Rock and roll. No more Bill of Rights, no more Constitution. Just His Highnessness King Obama here. Phone lines are open. 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Sam is sitting in our control room managing the Truth Warp drives, ready to take care of things when you call on in. I understand our Skype connection is not sounding very good, and I apologize. We'll try and reconnect over this next commercial break. Now, interestingly enough, okay, apparently our connection is fine now. Judicial Watch has started releasing more of this information. They were able to pry out of the Department of Justice with a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit. And the Department of Justice was fighting tooth and nail, but that the law is the law, and it's there to make sure government is transparent to you. They now have an audio recording of a Department of Justice staffer urging these protests against George Zimmerman. This was not an unbiased examination of the issues that were going on down there. The Department of Justice is saying, well, we're trying to make sure that the blacks understand that there isn't a problem in the black neighborhoods, and they were out there actually spending your money, and down there say, yes, we've got to make an issue about this. We've got to make let's get Al Sharpton down there. We're just going to get that all taken care of. And so now more of this information is coming out. Earlier in this week, when the Judicial Watch story first broke, all of a sudden the media backed off the Zimmerman trial, and it looked like maybe they were just going to sort of let this fade away since the cover was blown that this was being a manufactured event. But apparently somebody said, no, we've gone too far to stop now. We're back to saturation coverage. We're seeing all these Twitter posts and Facebook saying, yeah, we're going to get Whitey, and just really trying to fan this whole situation along. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with more about the Zimmerman case after these words from our... Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and I apologize especially to the people on Justin TV for the loud noises and crackling here. We're trying to get our audio feed back clean, and Hawaii's a nice place to live, but it is an island in the middle of a big salt ocean, and it is very rough on consumer-level equipment, and everything just sort of corrodes away very quickly. It all acts like it's made out of compressed rust, and we apologize for that, and we're just trying to keep it working the best way that we can here. So now we're talking about the George Zimmerman murder trial. The judge is now giving the jury the instructions, and Based on what those instructions are, and I understand it's over 20 pages of instructions, the judge can exert a tremendous influence over what the final verdicts might be. And so if the fix is in one way or the other, this is one way to tell. Again, going back to the trial of the 4 police officers who beat Rodney King, their acquittal resulted because of the instructions the judge gave the jury, in which the judge said, you must all agree on exactly which swing of the police baton represented excessive use of force. And if you can't agree on that, you're going to have to acquit, which is, of course, what the jury did, triggering the Rodney King riots, Operations Garden Plot and Cable Splice. And the agenda was, at least partly, besides, again, setting whites and blacks afraid of each other, while the government moved on its program for dollarification of the world through endless war, was also, of course, to federalize the National Guard, so that the governors of the states now had to go through federal government authority in order to get the National Guard to do operations within the state, basically stripping the state governors of their own military force, which is what the National Guard is really supposed to be. So we're seeing these stories about the new Black Panthers are coming in and they're going to cause all kinds of problem. And basically it's under the area of agent provocateurs, because remember, the original Black Panthers started as a non-militant group who wanted breakfast for the ghetto children and local control of the school curriculum. And it was only after the FBI had infiltrated them and sort of lured them and tricked them into a more militant stance so that they could be demonized by the corporate media that the original Black Panthers got their very negative image. It was all manufactured. And there's no reason to presume that the new Black Panther Party is not an updated version of the same group, same type of infiltrators and agent provocateurs. Again, the government has always followed a policy of trying to keep one group of Americans fighting with another group of Americans in order to prevent the American people from coming together as one American people and taking a good look at what's going on in that private central bank and what's going on in Washington, D.C. Back when the United States was still promoting the war in Vietnam, the FBI's COINTELPRO was constantly trying to keep the anti-war movement, the peace movement, divided and fighting amongst itself. It's an old tactic. And we know that's what the government likes to do. It all came out in the COINTELPRO hearings in the 1970s here. Now, a lot of people are wondering why the government may be trying to raise on a busted flush with the Zimmerman case. And obviously, now that the jury is allowed to come back and find Zimmerman guilty on the lesser charge of manslaughter, that's the escape hatch. That may well be what the jury decides to do, and if that's the case, the rug is completely pulled out from under fomenting race riots as a media distraction. And Monday we'll be back on to Benghazi Gate and IRS Gate and DOJ Gate and all these other gates that we need to keep talking about here. But other commentators, this is from the LoneStarWatchdog.com, other commentators are saying the Obama administration has lost the element of surprise to try and create a crisis out of the Zimmerman case with which to bring about martial law. We're all waiting for them to try a stunt like that. We know that's what they want to do. And again, we need to be very careful. We need to keep a close eye on the judge and the lawyers. In this case, there was an unrelated issue. This is over at Refreshing News 99, where in Polk County, Texas, a district court judge got caught using her smartphone to send text messages to the state's prosecutor during a trial to help steer him to help the state's case. That's not what judges are supposed to do. This judge got caught doing it. So we're going to be keeping an eye on that. My presumption here is that the reading of these 20-some-odd pages of instructions of the jury will take pretty much the rest of the day there in Florida. And whether the jury goes into sequestration to deliberate the verdict tonight or Monday is anybody's guess at this point here. Getting back to NSA Gate, Edward Snowden has put on a rare public appearance in Moscow, meeting with representatives of WikiLeaks and Amnesty International. And he has decided he is going to ask Russia for temporary asylum because he's tired of living in that transit section of the airport, which is sort of like a really cheap motel. And he is asking Russia for temporary asylum, and he says while he is in Russia, he will no longer release information that would anger the United States, which was Putin's demand to allow Snowden to stay in Russia, but that Snowden will only stay in Russia until they can find some other place that will be willing to take him in, that is not afraid of a drone strike on their territory following thereafter. Now, polls continue to show that Ed Snowden is viewed as a hero by the vast majority of Americans and the majority of people around the world, despite this constant demonization in the media. Oh, he's a narcissist, he's a traitor, he's an agent of Russia, an agent of China, he's clueless, he's evil, and all this. And it's not working. They're not getting any traction. The U.S. government has lost the ability to tell Americans who they're supposed to love and who they're supposed to hate. And that was one of the greatest of a dictator's powers over their people, is to say, you will love this group of people and you will hate these people over here. And they don't have that anymore. People are deciding for themselves, I'm a free human being. I'm a free citizen of planet Earth. I will choose who I think is good. I will choose who I think is bad. And you don't get to do that for me anymore. Russian lawmakers are out there saying that Edward Snowden deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. He certainly deserves it a heck of a lot more than Barack Obama did. However, after Obama got it, after Al Gore got it, after Shimon Peres got it, I think it's discredited. If somebody were to nominate me for the Nobel Peace Prize, I'd say I'm really not all that interested. It's tarnished at this point. But if they want to give it to Ed Snowden, absolutely, I would support that if he's impressed by it. Now, following on this failure of the demonization, we had, John McCain was out there saying Snowden is an agent of Russia and China, and we've got pushing along that ultimate war agenda here. We noted earlier in the week there is an online covert attempt to kookify Ed Snowden. And there was this story circulating around the net yesterday on these little off-to-the-side websites that all seem to go back to the same domain cluster, meaning it's probably somebody's public relations company that puts up all these little tiny blogs that nobody's paying any attention to. And they were saying Edward Snowden is leaking information. The government has captured UFOs and space aliens out in Area 53 or 57 or 62 or whatever it is. And I called them on that on yesterday's radio show, and I said, what's going to be next? Chemtrails and HARPs, and sure enough, today, over at a website called aircraft.org, they're running a story that Edward Snowden is leaking information proving chemtrails are real, and HARP changes the weather. And I'm sure by Monday, it'll be Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster, and Elvis is still alive, and all this other stuff. And it's a classic propaganda trick called poisoning the well. This is the intentional promotion of lies and silliness to blend with an embarrassing truth to discredit it. It's an old tactic. We saw it being used during the House Select Committee on Assassinations, when they were trying to use the umbrella dart gun to discredit the very idea of questioning the conclusions of the Warren Report. And then they finally had to question the conclusions of the Warren Report on the acoustic data, which indicated there was more than one gun firing in Dealey Plaza. Jim Garrison's case against Clay Shaw in New Orleans was discredited with a poison the well tactic. This witness who, said he saw Clay Shaw and Lee Oswald, and then once he got on the stand, blurted out that, hey, I got to fingerprint my daughter every night to make sure they are not sending a substitute, to simply destroy the case. And it worked. Clay Shaw was acquitted. Most of the jurors said Garrison made the case for a government conspiracy in the assassination of John Kennedy, but they really didn't go along with Clay Shaw being part of it, and then Clay Shaw died under mysterious circumstances only a couple of months later. So, UFOs, HARP, chemtrails, no plane at the Pentagon, we've seen this stuff, we recognize it for what it is, and the good news is that the powers that think they are continuing to play the propaganda game by the rules that worked in the 1950s. when the flow of information in society was top-down, feeding the lies to a public brainwashed by the public schools to trust the government and never question the media reports. But those days are gone forever. The fundamental nature of information flow in society has changed dramatically, with ordinary citizens mass communicating with ordinary citizens. Those old tricks no longer work, in large part because the majority of you free-thinking Americans are now fully aware of them. Got to take a break for commercials. We will. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I noticed something very interesting, because all morning long it's been nonstop coverage of the closing arguments in the Zimmerman case. And now that they're back from lunch and the judge is now reading her instructions to the jury, the corporate media is now pulling away. They're reporting on a story confirming that, yes, one of the two fatalities in that crash of the Boeing 777 up in San Francisco survived the crash but was hit by a fire truck, which is tragic and silly and dumb. But it strikes me as quite a strong contrast that after nonstop coverage of the lawyers up to the point where the judge starts to instruct the jury, now they're going to pull away. So we need to keep an eye on finding out just what it is the judge is telling the jury to do, because if they pull another fast one like they did in Simi Valley in the Rodney King trial, that's going to be very, very interesting. Now, getting back to NSA Gate. As you know, Ed Snowden, of course, is a global media figure, demon, star, depending upon your point of view. But he's not the only NSA whistleblower. And a lot of attention is now coming back onto Russell Tice, who was saying essentially the same thing Snowden was doing a while back, and the corporate media really didn't pay much attention to it because, hey, it's just one guy. And I think the reason Snowden got as much coverage in the corporate media was he came forward after it was already known the Department of Justice and the FBI were spying on all corporate media reporters, which destroyed any tendency for sympathy in the corporate media to look at any of these emerging situations from the government's point of view. And Russell Tice was on an interview with BoilingFrogs.com, Sibel Edmonds, and basically saying that Dick Cheney was using the NSA, was directly going to the NSA and asking them to spy on various U.S. politicians, judges, law firms, top military generals, including then-candidate Obama, McCain, Alito, and Petraeus. So now we know how they knew that Petraeus had a mistress on the side when they decided they needed to get rid of him. So this scandal is ongoing. It is corrupting our government from within. You no longer have rule by the majority opinion of the American people when the government itself can go to its own politicians and say, look, if you don't vote X instead of Y, we'll blow the whistle on how you're abusing small farm animals in your bedroom or something like that. Another story coming out from the Trenches World Report about how Microsoft basically handed the keys to your privacy to the NSA and built in that system, the NSA key, to allow the NSA to bypass any encryption you put on your computer. All of this talk about encryption and encryption standards is to create a false sense of security in you, the American people, that your communications remain private. And I am very concerned about all these people coming forward, Pirate Bay, and others saying, we're going to have an encrypted NSA-proof messaging system. No, they can't. And yes, they're going to make money off of it, but the worst risk we need to pay attention to is don't get lulled back into a false sense of security that the government is not going to go on spying on you as they provably have up to this point. We'll be talking more about online security and message security a little bit later in the month here. Now, NSA, of course, is trying to salvage its reputation. As you remember, Ron Paul said earlier in the week, this is all about protecting NSA's budget and their jobs. They've built this multi-billion-dollar globe-spanning spy network that is harvesting a huge amount of its raw intelligence from social media, where people tend to exaggerate about their own lives, especially if they're trying to get a hot date for Friday night. It's not a reliable source of intelligence, and they've built up this giant database of questionable accuracy. Mostly they're spending their time listening to sex talk of our overseas military, talking to their partners back home and trading it around like it's free porn. And they're trying to justify that this is necessary, that they're going to stop crime and terrorists with it. We've already proven they can't do that. And they're protecting their jobs, because if this all gets shut down, they're going to have to try and find jobs in the private sector, and they know how bad the private sector job numbers really are. They know it's not 6 or 7 or 8% unemployment. They understand right now only 47% of Americans have a full-time job. These NSA people don't want to have to start looking for a new job. It's going to be very hard to find a job in the private sector where you get to sit around all day and listen to sexy talk. So the NSA is already out there mounting a new public relations campaign about why this is so important and why you shouldn't question it. And they're trying to help these large corporations that were basically handing your information to the NSA, like Google and Facebook and Microsoft. They're trying to polish this pile of excrement there, and they're saying, we're teaming up with tech companies to protect the Internet. That's what this is all about. This is, you know, we're protecting the Internet here. It's kind of like a rapist claiming his actions are designed to protect virginity, is what they're saying. Or a burglar coming in saying, I broke into your home to protect your valuables. The NSA is trying to still ride the assumption that they're the good guys and everybody else is the bad guy, and we know that's not true. The NSA is the bad guy here. The government is the bad guy here. Seattle APEC proved it. We got to take another break for commercials. I've got to reconnect our Skype, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And let's see, getting on back to the situation. We're still trying to deal with, apparently our Skype connection to the mainland is not doing very well, and I apologize for that, but this is Skype itself reporting that they're having trouble maintaining a good connection from here in Hawaii to the control room in Austin, Texas. And network traffic seems to be low, so I don't know, maybe somebody's messing with us. Apparently we've got a clear connection right now, so we're going to continue the show as we always do, and if the sound goes bad, then just tune into Justin TV, and I'll be using signal flags and an Aldous lamp and smoke signals to keep getting the information out there here. So the NSA is out there trying to basically prop up its public image. They don't want to stop spying on you. They just want to sell you the idea that really this is for your own benefit, this is for your own good, and provably it is not. Now, yesterday, the Prime Minister of Luxembourg had to resign over the outcry in that country over this spy scandal and the failure of the Luxembourg government to protect the people from U.S. spying. And today, the entire government followed him. So the repercussions continue to echo around the world. Now, as you know, we're in the middle of a confirmation for a new head of the FBI, and it's kind of a little, you know, unsettling. This is Bush administration Deputy Attorney General James Comey, and he's out there making absurd statements saying that he would actually allow the use of armed drones over the United States of America for any target defined as imminent threat to the security of the country. That's one of those loosey-goosey gray statements that could be applied to pretty much anybody, including your humble host out here. We understand that they're already defining anybody who blows the whistle on government wrongdoing as aiding the enemy. And so now we've got the potential incoming head of the FBI saying that an armed drone strike would be justified against anybody leaking information about government wrongdoing to the public. That's a very, very dangerous state for the nation to be in. Apparently, Comey is refusing to criticize any of the spying, unwarranted violation of the Fourth Amendment. He is defending the indefinite detention without trial of U.S. citizens by simply saying, oh, that's an enemy combatant. The Constitution and Bill of Rights don't apply to them anymore. And, of course, he's one of the people who signed off on a memo authorizing waterboarding while serving under Attorney General John Ashcroft. So this is a very, very troubling nominee for the FBI. He's very much in line with this whole torture and extrajudicial imprisonment and denial of due process agenda. He thinks it's all really cool to protect the nation, meaning to protect themselves. That's really where, the stage we're at right now. The government knows they are in trouble. The American people have stopped trusting the U.S. government. The American people have stopped listening to the U.S. government. The American people are skeptical. The American people are suspicious. And horrors, if that is allowed to continue, the American people are going to start wanting their freedoms back that they surrendered under this whole myth of Osama bin Laden and a vast al-Qaeda terror network coming to harm them. And we all know it was all publicity, propaganda, public relations. And we do want our freedoms back. You were not authorized to take them in the first place. It's the Bill of Rights. It's not the Bill of Suggestions. Now, along with the potential incoming head of the FBI saying that armed drone strikes inside the U.S. against anybody deemed an imminent threat to national security, like I guess Michael Hastings would qualify on that. He'd gotten hold of something really damaging to the government, huge explosion of his car, and we're into the wet work phase. And now we're hearing from Customs and Border Protection. Their daily flight logs obtained by the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Again, those are some of the good guys. You need to pay attention to what they're saying. Apparently, the federal government, once they got you used to the idea of predator drones over the U.S. to protect the border, Customs is now loaning these drones to state, local, and non-customs federal agencies. They sold you the idea of predator drones to guard the borders, and now the Border Protection Service is simply handing the keys to the drones to anybody who wants them, to surveil you, to keep an eye on you. And these drones are weaponizable. And we've got an incoming head of the FBI that says, yeah, lethal drone strikes against Americans who are an imminent threat would be tolerated. Not by the American people, I'm pretty sure. Of tremendous concern to a lot of people, of course, is this privatization of this spy infrastructure. And there's a new industry in America called data brokers that collect together information collected on you from your web browsing information and from other sources. And apparently they are now tapped into the burgeoning system of automated cameras used by civil police departments to read your license plates and make a record of where that license plate was seen at a particular time at a particular location. And that is now being sold to these data brokers. So even without GPS and cell phone tracking, they have a record of every place you drive your car. First of all, to see what retail outlets you go to for targeted advertising, that's relatively benign. But again, if you're on your way home from work and you take a stop at the Adult Entertainment Center, that becomes something that can be used to put pressure on you. If you don't agree to hire the senator's nephew into your company, we'll show your wife the photos we have of you over there at the naughty store. That's why we ought to be concerned. Apparently, Barclays Bank, and this appears to be leading a trend, are taking it upon themselves to spy on your location via your cell phone's GPS tracking. Now, they say they're doing it in the name of preventing fraud to make sure that that is really you coming into the bank itself. Well, if they wanted to get your ID off your cell phone while you're in the bank, that would stop the fraud. But apparently, Barclays says they want to know everywhere you go, every moment of the day, and that's completely inappropriate. Completely inappropriate. Now, a little bit of good news people are celebrating. Janet Napolitano has announced her resignation as head of the Department of Homeland Security, or head of the Gestapo, whatever you want to call it. People are saying, yes, she's out, and a lot of people are questioning the timing as the DHS comes under more and more scrutiny over their abuse of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Apparently, Janet Napolitano is going to take over the presidency of the University of California. So no more free speech on that Berkeley campus, I'll tell you that right now. Now, down in Colorado, as you remember, there was that video of a police officer just gunning down this guy's dog, even though the dog really didn't appear to present a threat. And as a result of the huge public outcry, the Colorado State Senate has approved legislation designed to prevent dogs from being caught in the line of police fire. Of course, innocent bystanders and occupants of wrongfully identified homes are, of course, still fair game, and there is no bag limit. Down in Brazil, the protests there are continuing to take off. Not a lot of coverage in the corporate media, obviously, but Brazil's major trade unions have joined the strikers and are striking in 150 cities. We are looking at a global revolution, standing up against this effort to create a global fascist new world order. And it's spreading all across the globe. Will it come here? Eventually, yes. I'd like to avoid it, but I don't see how it can be stopped right now. And I think that's another reason why the Obama administration would like to trigger a small civil uprising they can put down brutally as a warning to the rest of Americans. Don't you dare stand up against your betters at the banks or the politicians. They want to have a little battle they can win now to avoid a big battle they would probably lose. More and more people are understanding what's going on behind this war agenda all over the globe. Over at RINF.com, they have an article, The U.S. War Against the World in Service of International Finance Capital, which is exactly what we've been saying with our own article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars. These wars all across the globe are all about forcing the nations of the world to accept slavery to private central banks, to force resource-rich areas of the world to only sell their natural resources for the U.S. dollar so the U.S. economy can get a piece of the action. We're going to come into your country. We're going to take a piece of the action of your gold, of your oil, of your wheat, your molybdenum. That's what it's really all about. It's not about war on terror. It's not about they hate us for our freedoms. It's all about wealth by conquest to make the money junkies happy. That's really what it's all about. And again, if you go back to All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, the history of this nation shows these money junkies, these money addicts behind this private central banking scam have historically been willing, have demonstrated, have actually done, sending hundreds of millions of human beings to death and disfigurement to keep their little pyramid scheme banking system in power. And it really all comes down to that, and I'm rather delighted to see more and more independent media outlets starting to address this as the real issue behind all these wars and all these assassinations. Same thing going on in Syria. Oh, Syria's got to sell their oil only for U.S. dollars. Syria's got to accept a privately owned central bank, and that's why the evil Assad has to go. Apparently have hit a major pothole on that one, because apparently the hired mercenaries are breaking into factions over just who they think is going to be running Syria after Assad is gone. And apparently one group, aligned with Al-Qaeda, or whoever Al-Qaeda really is, assassinated the leader of another faction, triggering a civil war among the hired mercenaries. They are no longer shooting at Assad and the Syrian troops. They're shooting at each other. I'll bet the ashtrays are hitting the walls of the White House right about now. This is a major whoopsie on this planned path to war with Iran. Because if those hired mercenary factions are fighting amongst themselves and killing each other off, it's going to be a slam dunk for Assad to retake control of Syria. So this is careened completely out of control. Major, major foreign policy disaster. Another little bit of embarrassment. This was actually reported in USA Today. Apparently, American weapons that were sent in for the hired mercenaries to use against Assad are now showing up in the hands of the pro-Assad militias. And it's not that big of a mystery, because only a couple of months ago we were reporting that a lot of the Syrian people who had originally bought the propaganda, drunk the Kool-Aid, and were joining the hired mercenaries against Assad, once they saw what these hired mercenaries were really like and the atrocities they were committing, they quit and went back to Assad's side, and of course they took their guns with them. So the situation is changing dynamically in Syria, and they've lost control of it. They've lost control of that completely. Meanwhile, over in Egypt, Obama is now threatening the interim government of Egypt. If they arrest any more Muslim Brotherhood leaders, the U.S. will cut off foreign aid, which reinforces the theory oft expressed on this show that the Muslim Brotherhood, like Al-Qaeda itself, is a manufactured propaganda body working for the U.S. and Israel. They began to realize Al-Qaeda was losing traction because while Al-Qaeda literally translated means the base, in Arabic slang it means a toilet. And nobody is buying this idea of this evil terrorist organization running around the world calling itself the toilet. Hello, I'm here from the toilet. I'm here to blow up your building. And everybody starts going, go silence, I kill you. Nobody's buying that, so they had to rebrand. We're going to rebrand as the Muslim Brotherhood. Nobody's going to make any cheap jokes out of that. U.S. Navy warships are now in the Red Sea. They're building up arms over there. It looks like the whole place is falling apart. And, of course, the very last thing the United States can do right now is just overtly invade all these nations whose covert interventions are crumbling. Because then the world would know exactly what's going on here and would unite against the United States, much as most of the world united against Italy, Germany, and Japan. We're the bad guys this time out, which is another reason we can't actually win this war the money junkies are trying to get us into. And again, the money junkies don't care who wins or loses. Money junkies love war. They love war. It's a huge moneymaker for them, and they don't care which side wins or loses because both sides go into debt to fight the war. Both sides go deeper into debt to rebuild from the war. And that's all the bankers care about. That's why you had Brown Brothers Harriman in New York City backing Adolf Hitler's rise to power up to the day war broke out, at which point Roosevelt slammed them all under the Trading with the Enemies Act, mostly because of that aborted coup d'etat the Wall Street bankers tried to pull with Major General Smedley Butler at its head. Now, just to show the extent to which the corporate media are trying to recapture control of the public's sympathies in this, Glenn Beck is out there making statements that the proper way to celebrate Ramadan is to go down to Guantanamo and immediately shoot all those prisoners in the head. That's his idea of celebrating Ramadan. Or let them starve to death. This is what he's out there saying on his radio show. Now, we understand that the reason these prisoners are being kept in Guantanamo, even though the U.S. government has admitted large numbers of them have done nothing wrong and should be released, but they're still being held. Why? Their bodies carry scars showing things far worse than waterboarding was done to them. They are all huge political embarrassments for the United States of America. They will never be allowed out while this government is still in power. And I'm sure they'd love to find some way for them to simply go away and not be a problem. Oh, there was this tragic epidemic of some illness that swept through Guantanamo and killed off all the prisoners. Or they all got depressed and committed suicide. And we have this horrible tragedy of the force feeding. It's just, and now we got Glenn Beck out there saying, let's celebrate Ramadan by shooting all Guantanamo prisoners in the head. Can you imagine what would happen if somebody in the Arab media said we should celebrate Christmas by shooting Americans in the head? Basically, that's the same thing. We're going to take a break for commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I'm noticing now our Fox News feed on our cable TV is glitching rather badly. So I think we're dealing with deteriorating infrastructure in this country. You know, all the money's gone off to Wall Street and war and Israel and everything. And we can't spend the money to actually keep things running in this country. This is completely unreasonable. A reliable infrastructure. If you demand reliable infrastructure, the terrorists will win. Anyway, getting on back to world politics, Texas Governor Rick Perry's getting ready to run for the White House in 2016. How do we know that? He's on his way to Israel. Texas Governor Rick Perry said Thursday he will visit Israel in October, and they're basically saying right in Washington Times, this is a signal. He's going to run for President of the United States of America, because we know that anybody who wants to be elected by the American people to be President of the United States, the first thing they have to do is go to Israel and get photographed touching the Wailing Wall and wearing a yarmulke and bowing and davening to Israel's government saying, please let me be president, I'll be good, really, I'll throw our children onto your enemies, we'll send you all our money and weapons here, please let me be president of the United States. The government of Israel says, well, think about it. Anyway. Now, over in Iraq, their banking system is about in the same condition as here in the United States of America. And the Iraqi people, in response, are starting to hoard physical gold. There's an old Arabic saying, gold is both for decoration and for storing. Now, that's for Arabs who are not Muslims, because Muslims do not wear gold for decoration. But they understand that physical gold and physical silver are wealth preservers. Historically, going all the way back to, well, Lawrence of Arabia. They don't trust paper currency, and for a very, very good reason. And so Iraq is importing and distributing, selling, large amounts of physical gold. They understand right now, with physical prices driven down by the paper contracts, now's the time to get in. So gold is back to surging, 3.3% up. And meanwhile, Brinks is reporting a 55% decline in physical gold inventories just in the last week. Everybody's grabbing physical, and that means all these paper contracts that are flooding the market to keep the price of gold down cannot be completed. They cannot be delivered on. And right now, the attitude is, you don't need that physical metal. We will settle the contracts for the cash value of the gold at the time the contract ends, plus we'll throw another 20% cash value on there. So you're making money anyway. It's all manipulation and rigging. But at some point, as all this overprinting of paper and ink starts to deteriorate the value of that paper faster than the appreciation of the gold contracts, the holders of these gold contracts are going to say, you can't do that. It says right here, you will deliver this physical gold to me on this date, and I am calling my lawyer. And that's when it's all going to start falling apart. We will be right back after station. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Sam is still in our control room, waiting for you to call on in and join us on the show. As we mentioned earlier in the week, over at Investment Watch Blog, Peter Schiff is out there saying this latest jobs report that was being bandied about as proof the economy is recovering, and really, if you're going hungry and jobless and homeless, it's your own fault. Don't blame us, says the government and the private central bank. But it was very misleading, because what it actually showed is full-time employment in this country continues to plummet, 250,000 full-time jobs lost to be replaced with 2 or 3 part-time jobs in order to evade Obamacare. So the claim that there are more jobs is complete nonsense. I mean, the government could set things up so that everybody gets fired and then gets a job for 1 hour a week shoving ads into mailboxes. That would be full 100% employment, but can you prosper a nation on, everybody working part-time at minimum wage? I think when we talk about the blueprint for the new America, we should tie the salaries and pensions of all government officials to the average wage and salary of Americans. We need to incentivize caring for the people instead of incentivizing the money junkies. That's what we need to think about doing here. Alrighty, let's see. Up in Detroit, where they're just dealing with this horrible, horrible rotting of their city, there's a show, Life After People, that's a pseudo-documentary on how quickly signs of our civilization will deteriorate if humans were to vanish from the planet. And I understand they've shot a lot of segments up there in Detroit inside all of those grand old architectural marvels that are just rotting away. And as you know, they're under this new emergency manager, Kevin Orr, who, even though Detroit is struggling to just keep itself together and stay out of bankruptcy, is paying his former law firm $1,000 an hour. Law firm Jones Day. I actually had some personal encounter with them myself many, many years ago. They're billing $1,000 an hour to help the emergency manager. It's his former law firm. They're raking in the dough. People in Detroit are going hungry, homeless. The schools are shutting down, but the lawyers, they're going to make money hand over fist here. Got another story down in San Diego. The daughter of a member of the board and the San Diego supervisor got a job being paid $90,000 a year to go out and tell the public about the fixing of the roads. That's not a job that needs $90,000 a year, to go out and attend meetings and saying, yeah, we're trying to fix the roads. And an apparent contrast to normal public relations positions, she's been criticized for refusing to return media calls or even answer any questions about the state of the roads in San Diego. But she's raking in $90,000 a year. Boy, life is good when you work in the government. And by the way, that's how the government keeps its employees loyal, even in the face of growing public discontent. Your average government worker makes 30% more per year than a private sector worker doing the exact same job. And as we've reported with places like the SEC and even the NSA, they're spending all their time on their taxpayer-funded computers looking at porn, eavesdropping on sex talk of our overseas soldiers. It's quite a racket. And you can understand why people say, oh, I want to go to work for the government. It's just nonstop money and nobody's criticizing me. Well, we're criticizing you now. We'll be right back. A tailor sewing collars for a living could only donate so much to his preferred candidate. The president of a giant corporation that hired the tailor could only donate the same amount in order to level the playing field. And of course, over time, we have seen this situation where corporations first created ways to donate to candidates around the laws, and then finally with that bogus Citizens United decision, simply opened it up to whoever's got the most money sets the agenda for the country. And of course, that agenda is, give me more money. And that's why we have arrived at fascism instead of capitalism, instead of a republic with a democratically elected government. We're a totally fascist society right now. Apparently, over at the Wall Street Journal, they have dug up another embarrassing piece of information about Jamie Dimon's J.P. Morgan Chase. Apparently, according to an internal audit conducted by Chase itself, 9% of their credit card collection lawsuits contained major errors. They're not being careful. They're not being honest. They're just filing paperwork and raking in the dough. Now, last year, your average CEO in the United States saw their pay go up 16% to $15 million per year. Now, how much did your pay go up? How much did your pay go up? Well, the answer probably is it didn't. We're seeing this article over at thinkprogress.org saying that wages have fallen fastest in the lowest paid jobs. We're talking about that segment of American society that is already barely hanging on. And they're going after that. In fact, billionaire Koch brother was out there saying, Charles Koch was out there saying, eliminating the minimum wage will help the poor. How is that going to help the poor? His idea is saying, well, it'll open up more opportunities for, part-time jobs. And it's a classic pattern. Wealth for the wealthy, poverty for the poor. And we all know how it ends. We've seen it in history time and time again. It ends with guillotines. And you'd think the money junkies would realize that. But they are addicts. It's a classic addictive behavior. We've all seen alcohol addicts and methamphetamine addicts and heroin addicts and cocaine addicts, they're oblivious to anything except that next fix. They destroy their families, they destroy their relationships, they destroy the community around them. And we recognize this is a disease process, but for some reason we have a cultural blindness in which we are encouraged not to see the damage caused by money junkies as a problem. And again, I want to draw a big black line between money junkies who want wealth without giving anything back versus people who get rich through honest effort. I don't have a problem with people getting rich. Capitalism is people like Steve Jobs, who helped launch the personal computer revolution with the Apple II. Capitalism is James Cameron, who makes really wonderful movies we all want to give him our money to see. That's capitalism. These are people who have made themselves rich in a manner we can applaud and look up to, and hopefully our children will emulate. And I want to hold people like this, that we admire, separate and distinct from the money junkies who want to game the system, who want to corrupt the politics, so that wealth just flows to them automatically without returning anything of any real value to society. Those are the sick people, like Bernie Madoff, already richer than any one person could spend in a single lifetime, and he still had that compulsion, that need to go out and set up another Ponzi scheme to rip $65 billion out of his investors. That's diseased. When somebody has a good home and a comfortable life and security, and that's not enough, they just have that compulsion to go out and get more by hook or by crook, that's a disease process. That's addiction. And we need to recognize it is a socially destructive illness. Right now, 1 in 20 families in Britain are having to rely on payday loans. Big part of the problem is employers who are delaying paychecks more and more. There are laws that limit how long an employer can delay a paycheck. It used to be a big problem in Hollywood. When I was back in Los Angeles working in the film industry, especially for non-union extras, you could wait 2-3 months to get a check. Wegmans in New York has cut health benefits for all their part-time workers, saying that, hey, it's all because of Obamacare. We can't afford to do this anymore. Over in Pontiac, Michigan, teachers are suing the Pontiac School District because they have been taking money out of the teachers' paychecks for health insurance coverage. And it turned out they were taking that money in order to balance their budget because funding for the schools has been cut. And the teachers all just found out their health insurance coverage will be canceled at the end of the month, and now they're suing the school district. It's reached a point where the system is starting to fragment and come apart there. Interesting article over in truthout.org. If you put $250 in a Chase savings account, you will get 12.5 cents per year. That's the adjusted standard rate interest on your savings account. However, even if you don't do any transactions on your account, you are charged $4 a month service fees on your savings account. Meaning that when you start that year with $250 in your savings account, you will end the year with $202 in your savings account, plus that 2.5 cents accrued interest. And it's another reason that you should take all of your money out of the bank other than what you need to cover your immediate obligations and keep it under your control. Put part of it into physical silver and gold. I remember when I was a kid, we were all told, put your money in a savings account. It will grow. No, it doesn't. It's shrinking. Over and above the fact that the purchasing power of your money is being eroded by inflation because of all this runaway quantitative easing, now we have the banks that are literally saying, yes, we'll take care of your money, but we get to keep a piece of the action. That's how abusive banking has become of the customers in this country. And the federal government's okay with it. Long as they get their campaign donation checks for that next election cycle. Oh, we've got midterm elections in 2014. We've got to kowtow to the bankers. We need their campaign checks. Here's a very annoying, angering story. This came out of Breitbart.com from out in California. There is a raisin farmer who is facing bankruptcy for defying a law that dates back to the Truman administration, requiring him to give the government a portion of his raisin crop without any compensation. This has something to do with what was called the Raisin Bank. Raisins were considered a critical food supply for soldiers in the war, and this law was passed, and California has apparently been going to all the raisin farmers and say, we get a piece of your action. We get a part of your raisin crop here. And this farmer has basically been saying, I'm not going to do that. The war is gone. The Raisin Bank is gone. This is just California grabbing some of my product. Like Sir Guy of Gisborne's thugs riding across the British countryside, stealing pigs and chickens and calling it taxation. And this farmer is right to do this because of the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution of the United States of America. Down at the bottom it says, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. The wealth grab is on. The bankers, the government, they don't even have the pretext of value for money or fairness. It's just grabbing whatever they can to keep themselves going here. Over in Great Britain, there's another huge scandal going on over there involving a £1 billion credit card spending spree by civil servants. They're now calling them the Whitehall Mandarins because they're enjoying a huge, lavish, luxurious lifestyle at taxpayer expense. Gourmet meals, fine wines. And what's really interesting, when you look at the total amount of money that was simply blown on creature comforts by these politicians, it exceeds the money being raised by this newly implemented bedroom tax, where if you've got an extra bedroom in your home, you have to pay a tax on it because you're contributing to global warming. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And apparently the Zimmerman trial has now gone to the jury. The judge finished her instructions. We're looking at the stock market. They're still trying valiantly to massage it to have their Friday happy ending. It looks like it's going to end mixed. We're going to grab a phone call here. Patrick from Great Britain. Aloha. Long time since you last called. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Unfortunately, your signal's still not good, unfortunately. There's something, I mean, you're coming across heavy with compression and everything, but eventually, hopefully, you can sort it out. About a few days ago, I banged you a quick email just giving you a whole list of alternatives, some free solutions. Maybe you saw that, and maybe you can move over to an alternative. Anyway, can you hear okay?
Yeah, I can. I'm getting a lot of complaints from people about how Justin TV's kicking in and out, and maybe it's sunspots or something like that, or it just could be the fact that our infrastructure really is in a very decayed state, and it's been allowed to do that, by the money junkies who don't want to spend money actually taking care of the people whose labor generates their wealth. And we're just going to have to live with it for a while here. And again, this is what we do with the money that you donate to Republic Broadcasting or to whatreallyhappened.com is we're replacing this equipment, which has a very limited lifespan, planned obsolescence, especially here in Hawaii, with all the salt air that's around. This stuff just does not last under the body of usage we put it to, which is every day, and it just does not hold up. Anyway, Patrick, what's on your mind?
That wasn't why I phoned. Just quickly, today you'd better off connecting on your landline phone like one of the other presenters do. But anyway, just wanted to mention the social housing thing here, just to really understand that. Basically, what happens is that a whole number of people here through the decades have been entitled under a lot of circumstances to social housing. If you're income was below a certain amount and things like that, which means that you get a house provided for by the council. It's not so that everyone has got a house. It's only social housing. And what happened, it meant was that, what happened that Margaret Thatcher then brought a scheme in that people who'd lived in the council house for a long period of time should have the right to buy that council house and should get a discount on the market value, depending upon how long they'd lived there. So people were actually in the 80s and 90s were buying their houses at huge discounts to market value. And of course, what happened was that those houses weren't being replaced. We've been led with a real problem now, is that all these immigrants that have been let in here and coming in, there's such pressures, and you get a situation where you get a lady on their own who, through no fault of her own, having lived in the same house 20, 30 years, having family or something that might have left, would be left with a situation with a house with a spare bedroom that no one was sleeping in or using, or even 2 bedrooms. And so the council said, look, look, we need that, or we're going to have to tax you on that or something. It's slightly unfair, but I can see the point of view that we've got such pressure on housing that no one has made a plan.
Well, the point here is that all of the revenue that was being raised by this bedroom tax does not even cover this runaway personal comfort spending from these politicians who have these government-funded credit cards. And it's not a problem unique to Great Britain. We've had the same problem here, where these government workers who are on very high salaries compared to private sector workers, and it's still not enough. They take their government credit cards and they're using them for, the luxurious living. Part of the IRS Gate scandal were these extraordinarily expensive conferences held at luxury resorts. People were using their government credit cards to buy porn. It's just out of control. It's a complete mindset that seems to infect these government agencies, both in the United States and in Great Britain, and that's a problem. It's a hard sell to ordinary people that they have to pay more taxes as it is. If it's going for things like getting the roads working, the fiber optic cables working, and the rest of it. But when you're being told that you must pay more taxes so that these government people collecting the taxes can go on out and buy bottles of fine wine and have gourmet meals for lunch, that's unacceptable.
Oh yeah, we just only recently recovered from the expensive scandal over here, and there's MPs doing all sorts of things, being able to get second properties on the cheap, and getting it totally.
Well, now you got a new scandal. Now you've got a new scandal.
Now they're just about our MPs, and there's about 600 of them now. And most of them are all redundant because all our laws are made by the European Union. I mean, they just stage this show in the Houses of Parliament pretending that they can make a difference, with the party, playing off one party against the other by ignoring the main issues, because they all work towards this for the financial institutions, the global corporations, Agenda 21, and all these things, as we know, in the European Union. But now they're just about to get awarded another pay increase of about £10,000 per year, which is another $15,000. They're taking their salaries up to about $75,000 a year, which is equivalent to about 100. Times it by 1.5, you get the dollars. It's about 120.
Okay, Patrick, I understand your frustration. We've got a U.S. Congress that tries to act like they can change things, but we know the laws are being crafted in Wall Street and Tel Aviv. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back with another America. Call. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones here. Aaron in Texas. Aloha, Aaron. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hey, Mike. I'm Mexican, so there shouldn't be any reason why I'm saying what I'm saying. A lot of Americans should ask themselves, why are these things happening? And you start back in World War I. My question in school that was never answered when I was younger was, why did Hitler hate the Jews? And it was because he just hated Jews, and that was pretty much the answer. But that
all right, thank you very much. We're going to let you go here. All right. Kind of expecting more of that same stuff. All righty, getting over to Obamacare, there is growing concern, and this is an article out of Activist Post, that Obama is going to try and use the health privacy laws, or the erosion thereof, as part of his campaign to disarm Americans. You need to understand the government is desperate to find some way to trick you out of your weapons. They're already saying that soldiers coming back after serving the money junkies in these foreign lands, oh, they're suffering post-traumatic stress disorder, they're strung out on these SSRIs, they can't be trusted with guns. There was a scandal just the other day where a veteran of the wars has been denied permission to buy his own personal hunting rifle because he got busted in a marijuana conviction something like 40 years ago. And they're looking for any excuse to take guns away from the American people, and that's why I think they were sort of fanning up this whole racism riots related to the Zimmerman trial to try and get that whole racist situation going. Because if there are riots, not only is it a public and media distraction from Floodgate and the economy and the wars, but if there were riots in multiple cities, Obama could get up there and say it's a state of national emergency, and the police could go into these areas and start grabbing guns. Remember Katrina? This was a natural disaster. And the first responders who showed up there, they were kicking down the doors and confiscating guns. How does that help the people who've just been slammed by a hurricane and flooding to take away their guns? But that's always the subtext in everything the government is doing. And this government is very much afraid of the American people. They recognize we have been pushed to the breaking point. Just like the people of Egypt under Mubarak. Just like the people of Brazil. Just like the people of Turkey. We're at that edge. And the government is preparing to wage war against you, the American people. It is revealed by this massive purchase of hollow point human-killing ammunition by the Department of Homeland Security, the arming of government agencies that do not actually have police powers, like the National Weather Service. Just the language they use regarding the Edward Snowden leaks, how he's providing aid to the enemy. Well, he was giving that information to the American people. So they can't call him a traitor and aiding the enemy without revealing the mindset of Washington, D.C. is that you, the American people, have become their enemy. Which is also underscored by this mass NSA spying on all law-abiding Americans. You are seen as the enemy of the United States federal government because you won't do as you're told. You won't believe as you're told. You won't continue to throw what's left of your wealth at the money junkies as you are told. You won't continue to breed new soldiers and throw them onto the designated bayonets as you are told. You are independent, and that means you're of no real use to the federal government of the United States of America, and that's what makes you dangerous. So now they're going to use the erosion of health privacy laws under Obamacare to start going out and saying, oh, this person is suffering too much stress, should not be allowed to have a firearm. They're already out there acknowledging this link between SSRIs and violence. We got a call from a gun owner in one of the states, said that when he went in to fill out the paperwork on his new gun purchase, it was right there. Are you on SSRIs? Are you on prescription antidepressants? And answering yes is grounds for refusal of your permit to buy a gun. They know there's a problem there. But they don't want to take the SSRIs away, too much money being made there. Probably most of Washington, D.C. is already addicted to those. They want to take away the guns. Because you know what a gun represents? It doesn't represent a tendency to violence. It represents the right of the people to say no. That's why it's in the Bill of Rights. That's why that Second Amendment is there, to reserve to the people the right to say no to a government gone out of control. And we're there. We are there. Getting back to the economy over here, Investment Watch blog again, Lindsey Williams, America will face a financial collapse before the end of the year. I think he's probably right. It's all being held together with fraud and deception and lies and propaganda, and they've put turbocharged V12 truck engines on those printing presses to keep cranking out that quantitative easing. And have you noticed how Bernanke is already backing off talk about tapering? Because they finally realize this soaring stock market is now hopelessly addicted to that fresh injection, that main line of ink and paper every single month. And without it, the stock market will correct. And the instant it does, all those Wall Street firms who've been buying huge blocks of stock to try and keep the market up will be instantly insolvent overnight. They have trapped themselves. Now, here is another example of just how court systems can get completely out of touch. Up in Ontario, Canada, there's a growing scandal. There was this railroad crossing that's been a problem for quite some time. It is unmarked. There are no lights. There are no gates. It's just a road crosses the train track, and there have been multiple accidents there. And apparently the mother of a victim who was killed on that crossing 2 years ago is now being sued for $500,000 by the railroad, CN Rail, because they're saying, oh, it was your son's fault. He should have been more attentive. He tried to race the train. He caused damage to our train. And, of course, that's provoked a huge amount of outrage, including from the family members of other people who have been killed on that same crossing. And what it all comes down to is somewhere a money junkie made the decision, you know, one of these crossings with the lights and the gates in it, they cost so much money. We really don't need one there. There aren't that many people crossing that we can cut some money here and pay for more bonuses and keep our stockholders happy. It's that money junkie thinking all over again. Deepwater Horizon, same thing. Didn't want to spend the money for an acoustic blowout preventer. Oh, that's $500,000. We don't need to spend that money. And the Minerals Management Service said, okay. The manual blowout preventer, 4 years overdue for maintenance. That's another money junkie. It'll be good for another year. We don't need to spend the money to haul that thing up and work on it. All of these huge disasters we see time and time again always goes back to a safety decision made by somebody more concerned with dollar signs in a ledger than with actual safety. Always. Challenger, Columbia, Fukushima, 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl. Always, always, always somebody cut the corner to save a few bucks, and that was the corner that led to disaster here. Apparently, Google, their Google Cloud suffered a major outage yesterday afternoon, which prompted a fury expressed on Twitter. The cloud-based email service, Gmail, along with Google Calendar, Google Drive, Google Docs, Google Spreadsheets, were all down for about 40 minutes. And this is why, that's another reason you should never use the cloud, over and above the issue that your data on the cloud is open for inspection and spying. It represents a single point of failure with wide repercussions. The consolidation of service into a single giant corporate facility is great for that corporation's profitability. But it is lousy for the reliability of the whole system. They're trying to return to the computational model of the 1970s, where there's a giant mainframe system owned by a corporation that they're charging for, and your own personal electronic device is just a terminal into that system. And it's great for that corporation's profitability. You're all dependent on the corporation. You have to pay that monthly fee or you're cut off from your own data. But if 1 million people have their data in the cloud center, a single failure means 1 million people go offline and stop work. If 1 million people have their own data at home on their own systems, a single failure means only one person is offline. Now, the computer animation industry learned that lesson long ago the hard way. Years ago, there was a company, Digital Productions. You probably remember them for the movie The Last Starfighter, which is a lot of fun. It's a fun movie. They featured a single Cray supercomputer that everything ran through during production. All the rendering, all the compositing, all the desk workstations were all using that one piece of hardware, and when that Cray broke down, which was alarmingly often, because it was cutting-edge technology, everybody got to go home for the rest of the day until the machine was fixed. Now, since then, CGI companies, whether it's Weta in New Zealand or ILM up in Northern California or Square USA here in Honolulu, rely on hundreds and thousands of little, tiny, inexpensive computers for desktop workstation standalone and rendering farms, so that when there is a breakdown or failure, the majority of the work continues to go on. You ever stop to realize what an attractive target for terrorism, if there were real terrorists, these cloud data centers have become? And that's another reason we should decentralize. Centralization is all about making money and keeping control. Decentralization means freedom, survivability. That was the reason for the design policy of the original DARPANET, which became the Internet. There was no central clearing point that could be a target in the event of war. It was homogeneous and distributed. Everybody's computer was part of the infrastructure, passing messages around. It was designed to survive war and acts of terror. It was decentralized. The trend towards centralization to get everybody going through the cloud is an attempt to regain control through centralization. Now then, we are halfway through the North Pole melt season. It is the coldest Arctic summer on record. The western Arctic sea ice coverage is now the third highest on record. Over in Greenland, which still has all of its ice, despite the dire warning of the former head of Greenpeace that Greenland would lose all of its ice in the space of just 20 years. That was 10 years ago. The Greenland Summit Camp has had to move their greenhouse to keep it from being buried in accumulating ice. In other words, this global warming nonsense continues to prove it was another hoax to trick you out of your carbon tax money, to trick you out of your freedoms by enforcing obedience to a global, centralized environmental authority that will tell you how warm you may have your home in the winter and how cold you may keep your house in the summer. Over at thenewamerican.com, they've got an article saying, you know, there's a problem with trying to reduce carbon dioxide because if you reduce it too much, you can destroy the earth. And this is a point we were making all along. Carbon dioxide is not a toxic pollutant. It is a necessary part of the chain of life. Plants need carbon dioxide to survive, to grow, to produce food. Commercial greenhouses will deliberately add carbon dioxide to the interior so the plants will grow bigger. And as carbon dioxide has increased in the atmosphere over the last decade, botanists are noting that areas of desert are starting to go back to being green. The deserts are shrinking as carbon dioxide increases. But Al Gore is still out there saying carbon dioxide is bad. You must pay a tax on carbon dioxide. It's bad. And according to astrobiologist Jack O'Malley James, speaking at the National Astronomy meeting at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland, if you take carbon dioxide down below a certain point, you are going to trigger mass extinctions from the collapse of the plant food cycle. Do you know why the carbon Nazis picked carbon dioxide as the villain? Because they could link it to human activity. Oh, it's all the fault of your SUV. It's all the fault of your wasteful standards of living, your carbon footprint. Carbon dioxide is, first of all, NASA's confirmed it's not really a greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. It acts like a coolant. And it's not the worst of the greenhouse contributors. Water vapor is overwhelmingly the largest greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. But you're not going to convince people to pay taxes over clouds. Methane is a far more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, even before the recent NASA study. Methane is produced by deep-sea microbes, who are far too intelligent a life form to fall for Al Gore's nonsense. And now on top of that, we have this fracking scandal, where we know these drills, these wellheads, the distribution pipes are not secure and sealed. If you go back to that documentary, Gasland 2, they show video of the pipes connecting the wells to transport the gas, and they're leaking and bubbling. And so methane's going up into the atmosphere. It's probably responsible for killing off a large portion of the bird population. Fish die-offs in lakes that are being contaminated with methane. You don't see Al Gore out there screaming that we've got to stop this methane pollution in the atmosphere because it's contributing to global warming. No, that would offend big oil. We can't do that. We're going to blame carbon dioxide, and we're going to blame it all on ordinary people and get them to pay carbon taxes and be obedient to the lords of the climate. It was one of the pillars of this push for a global government. This push for a new world order global government rested on a foundation of 3 pillars. One of them was human-caused global warming, requiring obedience to a global climate authority. That one's not working out too well. The second was a global flu pandemic. They tried that back in 2009. Turned out to be less severe than the ordinary seasonal flu, but they were trying to sell a world global health authority that would control all of our health care decisions, sort of like Obamacare on steroids. And the third was a global financial catastrophe requiring a global bank to solve it all. They're obviously still working on that one. But it's all lies, it's all fraud. Anybody living in the northern latitudes looking out their window, especially at winter, knows it was all a bunch of USDA choice bovine excrement to trick you out of your money, to trick you out of your freedoms, to make you a slave to the money junkies. Going to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're still talking about ClimateGate and the failure of the human-caused global warming hoax. And you remember back in the early days of this when people said, look, the sun controls climate for the entire solar system. And the carbon Nazis were saying, oh, you're just being silly. The sun has nothing to do with it. It's all the fault of you icky-poo human beings. You are all sinners against the earth, and you will atone. And we were talking about the Maunder minimum. This was when astronomers noticed that the sun seemed to have a lot fewer sunspots between the years of 1645 and 1715, and coincided with what was called the Little Ice Age, which the Northern Hemisphere was still in the grip of during the American Revolution. And this last solar cycle seemed very mild and seemed to not fall on the expected 11/22-year timeline that recent observations of the sun over the last 100 years seem to indicate. And now we have 3 independent peer-reviewed scientific journal articles saying that, yes, it does appear the sun is heading into a new minimum cycle. The next one is supposed to start in 2020, but they're saying it may be delayed, and the sun may be going into a period of hibernation. And this makes absolute sense here because, as we pointed out before, we've only had the means to really observe the sun scientifically for 100 years. And during that time, they picked up on the 11-year sunspot activity cycle, then realized it was actually 22 years because the solar magnetic poles were shifting. And we have no way of ruling out much longer cycles of solar activity, including ones that could have triggered the ice ages. And we know that along with solar activity, the orbit of the Earth itself changes shape from circular to elliptical over roughly every 100,000 years. And when it's elliptical, because of Kepler's laws of orbital motion, it spends more time further away from the sun than close to the sun, and that's where the ice ages come from. And human activity's got nothing to do with it. So now we're seeing these reports coming out that, yes, indeed, solar activity seems about ready to take another pause. We could be heading into a new Maunder minimum. So all of this talk about human-caused global warming and the world is going to burn up, and so it was nonsense. We're looking at cooling weather, and the last several winters have proved that. You remember back when this whole ClimateGate thing came out, where they were caught saying, we don't understand why the world isn't getting warmer, the way our computers said, we've got to hide the decline. Remember that message, hide the decline. Okay, we've got to take a break for station identification. We're going to be back with one phone call that's waiting on the line, and the lady. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, hour number 3. And for those of you watching on Justin TV, the gorgeous creature behind me is the lovely Lady Claire.
Aloha.
And I need to adjust your mic because it's in the wrong place. There we go.
Thank you, dear.
Turn down the mic. We're going to take one phone call before we check in with Claire here, and that's George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hope you have a good weekend. I just, I'm kind of like looking at this. I'm seeing how the Obama administration have their hand in the influence of this trial with the COINTELPRO, with the new Black Panthers, and possibly white supremacists. And if Obama tries to start riots and it turns out tries to use it in national emergency to try to come after our guns, I see it blowing back in their face.
I'm already seeing articles starting to show up in the independent media about the blowback of this revelation. We have an American people that understands the government likes to play dirty, NSA spying, all this other stuff that's been going on, complete evasion of the Bill of Rights. They're ready to accept that the government is manufacturing crises in order to sell us a solution, whether it's human-caused global warming or post-Zimmerman riots. And, the Americans are now quite healthily skeptical and suspicious of what the government is doing, and I think that's a very, very good thing, and there will be a blowback. And it could be another Benghazi, where it's something that's staged and set up to make Obama look good, and it's going to blow back on him and just further savage his reputation and the credibility of the entire federal government.
Well, also, too, when I was in Houston yesterday, I had to buy ammunition. I've seen a lot of black veterans buying a lot of ammunition because they're going to prevent riots in Houston. I mean,
boy, that's rough.
Well, the thing is, I remember back during the Ryan King riot, they tried to make it all racial tension, but they didn't show us like a lot of good black people were carrying whites away that were being beat up. You know, they were out there rescuing people. They never showed the.
I remember that, and we had, was it with Edward James Olmos and Danny Glover?
No, it was Arsenio Hall.
Arsenio Hall were down there trying to help clean up the mess. And again, there were people who were rioting and people who were trying to help of both colors, but the media kept pushing, ooh, the blacks are this and the whites are that. I've been seeing the same thing in my email over the last couple of days. And I think it's the height of recklessness and stupidity for the U.S. government to be trying to get some kind of post-Zimmerman upset going, even though we already know the U.S. Department of Justice was down there fanning up this racism issue right from the start.
Well, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Claire. Have a good weekend. I want to hear Claire's voice now.
Well, what a coincidence, so do I. And to sort of recap, getting back on the Zimmerman case, the judge concluded her instructions to the jury. We don't know yet what those instructions were.
Mike, let me ask a question. Is a 27-page unit of judge's instructions unusual in this kind of a case? I
have to say I don't know because I've never seen a court proceeding with judge's instructions of that length. The last time I heard a judge's instructions to the jury was, hang him, but they acquitted me anyway. So I don't really know. But the only reason I'm concerned, of course, was because of the very strange instructions given by the judge to the trial of the 4 police officers accused of assaulting Rodney King.
Yes.
And those instructions were clearly designed to get those police officers acquitted, and it did succeed, and the riots went on. So we're going to see what's going on. We have to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with the lovely Lady Claire after these words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I think we got some of our audio stuff back together for those of you dealing with all the noise. I'm going to have to pull all this stuff apart this weekend, clean it, and put it all back together. Alrighty, so we're talking about the Zimmerman case. Before we get into it, and we've already talked about how the case was literally thrown against those 4 police officers who were caught on video assaulting Rodney King, and the resulting...
That is, talk to your ministers, talk to your lay leaders about what you can do if Zimmerman is acquitted. And the other pragmatic thing I was thinking about, I do not know, did Trayvon Martin have siblings? Brothers or sisters?
I actually do not honestly know.
One of the most powerful pragmatic things to do, especially if they're young, is to develop some educational scholarships for these kids. That, to me, would be one of the most powerfully pragmatic things that communities can do in honor of this kid's memories. Make sure that his siblings get the most excellent education humanly possible.
That would be a very nice thing to do. But one of the things that is happening right now that I'm very gratified to see is that members of the black community within Florida are already out there saying, do not resort to violence. I mean, voice your anger, but don't resort to violence. Because you have a right to be angry and speak your piece if you don't agree with whatever the verdict is going to be. But any resorting to violence only serves the government's interests. And if you've got somebody in your group who's pouring gasoline into bottles and tying rags around them to hand to you to say, here, you go out and throw this at whatever, I guarantee you that's the FBI informant. And they're there to trick you into doing something that will damage your agenda, that will make your community look bad, will make your particular race look bad, and will allow the government to distract from floodgate economy and war, and in a worst-case scenario, declare a national emergency, martial law, which will be followed by gun grab, gold grab, shutting down the independent media and saying, all right, we got you now, and you're going to spend the rest of your life slaving for the private bank and breeding soldiers to throw into these wars against those pesky nations who don't see the blessings and joys of private central banking. It is a new form of slavery. And your slave chains are made out of those Federal Reserve notes. And those slave masters want to enslave us all, regardless of color, race, creed, gender, orientation. Okay? Don't fall for it. Don't be stupid again. The government right now is betting the entire farm that you can be as easily swindled and fooled as those college students were at Disneyland, or the blacks and the white people were at with the Black Panther coloring book. This government lives by dirty tricks, and you need to remember that's what the government does to get its way with you.
Absolutely. So I hope that people will get out there and talk, and especially leadership in faith communities, wherever you are. I would like to go into the immigration, military-industrial immigration complex. I know we're probably going to have to take a break in the middle of it.
We're coming up in we've got about 2 minutes here, so why don't you get started? Well,
it appears that back in 2010, there was a Department of Homeland Security report, which, thanks to the Freedom of Information Act request by Electronic Frontier Foundation, who are the good guys, the Customs and Borders Protection agencies now suggest arming their small fleet of surveillance drones. The purpose is to immobilize TOIs, or targets of interest, along the U.S.-Mexican border. And, of course, they're going to start with non-lethal. But I would be willing to bet the farm that the lethal weapons are going to follow.
Well, remember, tasers are not non-lethal. They had another death from a taser in Great Britain earlier in this week. And what do they mean by target of interest? Somebody who's just walking on their side of the border, looking to harvest his marijuana plants, and they're just going to zap him?
Could be.
Oh, boy.
And I have been telling our readership and listenership for some time that the drone strikes we have seen in places like Yemen, Somalia, Pakistan, and Afghanistan are not going to stay in those places. And it appears that the U.S. government is preparing for just such a security immigration complex right here in the U.S.
Well, as we reported earlier in today's show, documentation also from the Electronic Frontier Foundation has come out that the Customs and Border Patrol are already loaning these Predator drones to state, local, and federal law enforcement that have nothing to do with Customs and Border Protection. So the drones are coming, people. The drones are coming. So our commercials. We have to take a break here. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're sitting here with the lovely Lady Claire. And Claire, you wanted to talk about an interesting revelation regarding the amnesty program for the illegals in the United States.
Yes, I did not know this. And apparently, amnesty's price is going to be $12,433 for every legalized immigrant household. And there's been a fight between the White House and elements in government which oppose the White House view. And it's
I need to break in here and make a clarification. What they're talking about here is this is the price that will be in tax dollars to provide services to these amnestied families that will be over and above the expected tax revenues these families will generate. In other words, along with diluting the job market and taking more jobs away from legal U.S. natural-born citizens, these instant citizens are going to be a further drain on the system because they will not be paying enough in tax revenues to meet the expected costs of taking care of these new instant citizens. So it's going to be another slam on an already damaged economy.
Well, this immigration bill is worse than bad. What it will do, if some form of it does get passed, and it does not look like there is a lot of appetite for actually getting it passed in the other house.
In the Senate.
In the Senate. And what it's going to do is to throw tons of just made legal, close to sweatshop labor on the markets, forcing labor costs down, which is precisely what the corporations who fund congressional members' campaigns want to see. But the costs are going to be enormous, add mightily to the already strangulating federal deficit, and do absolutely nothing, honey, to bring back those good-paying jobs, now offshored and outsourced, which used to support what was left of the middle class.
Well, we know that every tyranny in history has to destroy the middle class to perpetuate itself, because it's from middle class that opposition to oligarchy always emerges. Whether it was the American Revolution, came out of the middle class, French Revolution came out of their middle class, the Soviet Union attempted to perpetuate its dictatorship by designing a system in which the middle class could not be allowed to exist right from the start. Everybody was either extremely universally poor or incredibly rich within the Politburo, and there was really no middle class with which to mount a challenge to the policies of the Soviet Union. They had to wait it out until the Soviet Union simply collapsed from its own rot, much as the U.S. federal government is doing right now before our eyes.
Absolutely. I'd like to kind of move on to the Farm Bill.
Yes.
The House Republicans successfully passed a Farm Bill Thursday by splitting apart funds for food stamps from the federal agricultural policy. And I'm looking at this, and I'm thinking the nature of a society is very much revealed by how they treat the most fragile in that society. Now, in my world, food-insecure families with kids are among the most fragile members of this nation. And as our readership and listenership know, Mike and I commit to 2 food distribution programs co-sponsored by a couple of churches in our community. One is for elementary school children who many times the families don't have money to buy food in the 3rd week, and kids go to school hungry. They can't learn in that situation. And the other is for people who, for whatever reason, cannot work, are retired or living on subsistence Social Security, or who do work minimum wage jobs that don't provide enough money for food.
Well, there's another factor in there as well, and that is, of course, all of the elderly people who paid into a pension plan during their working life, only to see that pension plan seriously defunded by the 2008 mortgage-backed security fraud. And so people are getting checks from their pension fund, and those checks are not what they were promised they would be, and the pension funds are saying, look, we're sorry, we got creamed in that mortgage-backed security thing. This is all we have, and this is all we can do for you, and these people are going hungry. And our government, and certainly the money junkies, are turning a complete blind eye to what's going on because they don't want to admit this is all a result of their money junkie policies. They want to blame the victims and say, oh, they're hungry because they refuse to work. And they're all willing to work. The jobs went away. The high-paying jobs that made the United States great have all left. Right now, only 47% of Americans have a full-time job. That is worse than the Depression of the 1930s.
Right. And in this land of plenty, when children go to bed hungry and uncertain where the next meal is coming from, I think that's criminal. And I hope that those who voted against including the food stamps bill into the Farm Bill are just ecstatically happy knowing how much they have deepened the pain and suffering these kids are enduring right now, which is real. We see it every week, Mike, when we go down to the church to drop off food.
We absolutely do, and we stand there and we hand out the food to these people. It's a real Buddha on the road moment, and I maintain this government has no moral or even legal right to hand 1 penny of your tax dollars to a foreign government while there are Americans sleeping in the alleys and eating out of trash dumpsters of this country. It is not an appropriate use of our tax monies to be buying weapons for other countries around the world and ignoring the problems caused in this country by
Right.
this private central bank.
Amen. Absolutely.
All right, we got to take another break for commercials. We will be right back. Welcome back to the show here. And Claire, what is next on your list of hot topics?
Well, something that got almost no notice in the corporate news. Doksar Tsarnaev appeared in court this last week to plead not guilty to the charges in the Boston Marathon murder bombing case. And there was one little aspect of this that has not been touched. Apparently, Mr. Tsarnaev arrived at court with his face swollen and his arm in a cast. Now, I wonder just how the heck that happened. And if I were a betting woman, I would almost be willing to bet certain elements of various alphabet soup and governmental agencies were trying to persuade Tsarnaev to plead guilty, and he said no. I have to wonder.
Well, you know, he could have wound up shot dead like that kid down in Florida,
Yep.
where they were trying to link the Tsarnaevs to this drug murder to demonize them and erase any possibility that anybody would ever find them innocent of wrongdoing.
Yep.
And again, those FBI agents who murdered this kid in Florida, they're off the hook. When we heard about Dzhokhar Tsarnaev's pleading not guilty to all charges, a lot of people were commenting. It looked like he'd been recently beaten up. It's been 3 months since this incident happened. He shouldn't look like he's seen recent trauma.
Yes.
But it
That's
does,
just the point.
And, of course, at the time, it was not reported that he'd broken his arm during his arrest. So,
Well, normally, if you've got a cast on, it's maybe 8 weeks.
yes,
So, yeah, something is really fishy there.
something is rotten in the state of Denmark on
Yes.
that one. Okay,
Yes.
Anything else?
Oh, yeah. I would like to address something that you talked about with Janet Napolitano's resignation.
Yes.
Now, the announcement has been made, but she is not really resigning officially until September. Why? And it's noted that she has been nominated for the post as president or chancellor of the University of California. But if I understand that process correctly, it's not just one person. So why does she think she has to get out of Dodge in September and be as far away from the federal government as humanly possible?
Well, now, just to play devil's advocate here,
Okay.
when you have a key player in an organization, they can't just up and quit because of the hierarchical chaos it'll produce. They have to worry about transition planning. They have to give everybody a heads up for what's going on.
Right.
But in all probability, there's a little back channel deal where it's sort of a given that Napolitano will get the presidency of the University of California. In fact, I've seen it reported in a couple of places suggesting it is a done deal.
Okay, all right.
And that any approvals coming through from the state of California are just kind of pro forma marching in place to look like the customs are being obeyed. And it may be that Napolitano wants to get out because along with all these other rising scandals around the U.S. government, the American public are now willing to stand up and say the Department of Homeland Security is not making us safe. They're abusing us. They are themselves a source of terror in our society against the American people.
Right.
The TSA have yet to actually catch a real terrorist, but they are certainly spreading a lot of sexually transmitted diseases on those rubber gloves. They've stolen a lot of electronic appliances from luggage. They've angered most of the world's tourists against coming to this country. They still owe me a laptop.
Yes. And that sort of segues into another topic I wanted to look at. Apparently, only 1% of so-called terrorists nabbed by the FBI were actually real. And a large number of arrestees were poor and powerless and were caught in FBI threat factory stings. And so we've had since 9/11 this security industrial complex to allegedly make us safer.
Well,
But
what they're trying to do is they're trying to sell us Arab Muslims are bad, Muslims are bad. We have real terrorists who were caught both in New York and Florida, who were caught with explosives and plans to use them, but they were the wrong ethnic group, and so the corporate media just sort of glossed over them.
Right.
But you're absolutely right. The FBI, and we just saw the same thing happen up in Canada, where the FBI informants will go out and say, I'm going to commit this act of terror, and I've got a bunch of money here, and if you'll come help me carry some of the cases and stuff, I'll give you a bunch of money to pay your bills.
It's entrapment.
And that's exactly
Pure
right.
and simple.
And so these people, these patsies, get arrested. Their names and faces are all over the headlines 6 months down the road. The judge says, yeah, it's entrapment and cuts them loose. But by that time, the propaganda agenda has been served. And as you pointed out, and we reported this earlier in the week, only 1% of the FBI's terror arrests were actual, real, demonstrable terrorists. Probably the two people we found, in New York and Florida. And the rest are all manufactured to sell you the idea that you're supposed to be afraid of Arab Muslims around the world, and it is all as big a lie as human-caused global warming. It's as big a lie as the Black Panther coloring book or riots at Disneyland or Saddam's nuclear weapons.
And what would really singularly discourage any genuine acts of terrorism in this country would be for the federal government to stop mucking about in other people's countries to get the resources to which this government has absolutely no moral right.
Well, how dare you say that? Mucking about in other countries is our manifest destiny. The imaginary playmate in the sky has said it is the job of the United States to go out and muck about the rest of the world.
And that, of course, would be logical, which is why it's never addressed. Yeah, it's amazing. Also, these people are either mentally incompetent or financially desperate, and they make great patsies.
They absolutely do. I mean, anybody who's reasonably sane, who is not desperate to feed his family that night, is going to simply respond to these kind of inquiries from the FBI. I'd like your help to blow something. I'm not going to do that. Works to the government's... apparently my boss at RBN is saying God is going to punish me for that.
Oh, stop it. Please be nice.
Probably.
Please be nice,
when I die, I'm going to go to the dark regions, and since I am anyway, I intend to earn my admission as well as I can from here on out.
I'd like to also point out, now this happened last year, but if the Obama administration doesn't get riots after the Zimmerman trial is over, last year, via executive order, Obama signed his name to a law allowing him to control all private communication in this country in the name of national security.
Yes.
So what I'm thinking is, if the riots do not happen, and hopefully, please Lord, they won't, it definitely set the stage because all the mechanisms are in place for a cyber false flag.
We have been warning about that for quite some time, that one possible way the U.S. government and Wall Street could get out of this mess they have created for themselves is to intentionally crash the computers of the Wall Street financial centers, and I know they're actually coming up on a drill simulating a cyber attack on Wall Street's computers, and they could crash it all and say, gosh, we don't know who we owe money to, we're just going to have to write it all off and pretend it never happened. Gosh darn those Chinese, Russian, Iranian, Al-Qaeda computer hackers for doing this to us, and take what would be a financial crash caused by their own fiscal policy and mismanagement and try and turn it into an act of war by those dastardly whoever is out there that we need to attack.
Yeah, fill in the blank, and whoever we want to attack, that's it. I'd also like to share a little bit about Obama's plan to predict future leakers, which experts are saying it's unproven, it's unlikely to work.
It never really has. It's just part of a campaign of terror. The U.S. government is now conducting a campaign of terror against their own employees. And I think one of the most alarming aspects of it is this idea that you can be prosecuted for failing to report suspicious behavior.
You could face penalties, including criminal charges. They can lock you up.
Exactly right. And what this is going to do, it's going to trigger all of the little petty jealousies and minor competition in federal government staff. They're going to look, I'm up for a promotion, but Bill over there is up for the same promotion. I think he's feeding information to the New York Times, so I'm going to turn him in so that I get the promotion. And you're going to see an epidemic of that, and the net result will be the federal government staff will be completely demoralized, and that will mean they are simply going to be less effective than they already are.
Yeah, it's going to make an already brutal work environment even more brutal. You know, and that it would seem to me that it is absolutely going to be counterproductive.
It is, in the long run, it is very destructive. The cohesiveness of the staff will be destroyed. Everybody will be going in their own directions.
Right.
Management is going to face a huge, huge problem trying to hold together the unity of any functioning structure where everybody is suspicious with everybody else. And this is a tactic you normally use on a population in order to create that kind of disunity and distrust, but using it on your own government workers is a horrible, horrible mistake.
Yep.
They got to be on SSRIs over there.
Yeah, the sheer wealth of bad decision-making you are seeing coming from this administration.
Oh, man, if bad decisions could be sold at a profit, we would all be rich right now.
Yes, amen. I'd like to move over also to education.
Okay.
Apparently, with something straight out of Gattaca, scientists have developed iris scanning technologies which is about to be deployed at various schools. And, in other words, they're sort of grooming our children that this is completely normal, the iris scans. If I knew for 1 second, if we'd had kids, and I knew that this was a school policy.
I'm a kid.
Well, you are, but a different kind of kid. I would pull that kid out of school so quickly, and I would be very sure to let the administration know and why I was pulling that child out of education.
And it's all about control and brainwashing because it's already been demonstrated by security experts that real criminals who wish to avoid detection can fool those eye scanners with special contact lenses.
Right. I mean, it's not foolproof. It is simply about pressing down and oppressing the American people.
And there's one other aspect you need to look at when you're talking about iris scans. There are a lot of people whose irises actually physically change depending on their emotional state. I had a cousin when I was growing up who had this horrible curse. Her eyes were in kind of this sort of midway zone between green and blue, and when she was lying, you could literally see her eyes change color, which is a horrible thing to have to deal with when you're growing up and going through normal childhood. But there are people who, because they're having an illness or they're under stress, the iris scan isn't going to work. When you're on the retinal scan systems, people who are coming down with high blood pressure or diabetes, their retina goes through changes, they could be locked out of things. It's not reliable, and it can be defeated and fooled by those who wish to do so. Just like encryption. The NSA is spying on all of us because they know all the encryption we're using. Real criminals and real terrorists and real criminals can get around it by developing their own encryption. None of this Orwellian, dystopian lifestyle that they're forcing on us really makes our lives any better. It simply makes us more controlled for the benefit of the money junkies.
Right, and I think for the last thing I'd like to address this hour, apparently U.S. arms are showing up in the hands of pro-Assad militias.
We did mention this earlier in the show, and the explanation is simple. We reported a couple of months ago that a lot of Syrians who had initially signed on with this so-called revolution against Assad, once they saw that it was all hired mercenaries and was all about delivering Syria into the hands of American corporations, they quit and went back to Assad, and they took with them the weapons they'd been given.
Yep, definitely, definitely. But it would appear to me right now, Michael, that the Obama administration's Syria policy, if one can actually call it that, has just collapsed into smithereens right now.
With all of a sudden, there's a civil war among the hired mercenaries. This one group that's supposedly Al-Qaeda killed the leader of a rival faction. That rival faction has now stopped fighting Assad and is now fighting the first faction. It's completely... This plan to take over Syria is completely cratering, which is why we're hearing people like Carl Levin saying, oh, it's time to directly invade. Forget about this hired covert overthrow stuff. We just need to go in and show them who's boss and bomb the heck out of the place. It is cascading out of control, and I think we're on the doorstep of some really dramatic events to try and regain the initiative in this war of conquest.
And when Senator Levin said that, I think my response was, sir, forgive me, have you gone absolutely stark raving, barking mad?
No, he's just doing what he's being told by his masters in Israel.
I know, but this means war with Russia, Mike, and as you and I have pointed out innumerable times on the show, the U.S. government doesn't have the troop strength, it doesn't have the manufacturing or the money to persist successfully against Russia in a conventional war.
Which is why it will go nuclear, and we know that back in the Bush administration they started creating a whole new generation of tactical nuclear weapons. And so the United States ended World War II with nuclear weapons, and it looks like when we're already in World War III, we might as well accept it. When it starts to escalate, the U.S. is going to go in and use nuclear weapons. And they'll try and blame somebody else for it. Oh, this proves they had nuclear bombs hidden underneath that children's hospital.
I guess we need to look at getting some SPF Chernobyl, right?
Yes.
Specifically right here in the middle of the Pacific.
Yes.
You know. But I would like to hope that saner heads prevail. Well,
the sane heads all seem to be out here in the American heartland, and certainly here at RBN and WhatReallyHappened.com. I think everybody inside the Beltway in Washington, D.C., they've got to be on SSRIs. They're making the perpetually poorly thought out, poorly considered decisions, and it's coming apart around them. And like I said earlier in the show, I imagine there's probably a lot of ashtrays hitting the walls of the White House right about now. That was certainly true under the Clinton administration when things were going bad. Stuff would get thrown. Anything else?
I think that is it, and thank you so much for having me on the show.
All right, well, thank you for being had. We're going to pull down your microphone here and get back to the last couple of stories before the end of the show and Powhatan Friday. Over at Heathrow Airport, yet another Boeing 787 Dreamliner suffered an unexpected fire. This was just sitting on the runway and just spontaneously burst into fire. Boeing's stock took a hit because of that. Again, there's a question being raised by this last weekend's crash at San Francisco involving the Boeing 777 because there have only been 2 accidents involving that aircraft, but both of them involved undershooting the runway at approach. Certainly that one at San Francisco and an earlier incident again at Heathrow, suggesting there might be a problem with the auto-landing, auto-throttle system, which is what the co-pilot in San Francisco said he was dealing with. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And apparently the jury has, in the Zimmerman case, has sent a request to the judge to review some of the evidence presented at the trial, including photos of Trayvon Martin at the crime scene. The toxicology reports, looks like they're asking if either Zimmerman or Trayvon Martin were on any illegal substances at the time, which would probably have a significant bearing on their deliberations. The jury is in recess right now while the judge and the lawyers go over the list of items the jury wants to look at. So it looks like it's going to be a long deliberation. And there will not be a quick verdict. I was noticing they were showing outside the courtroom, and there's a smattering of protesters there with signs saying, Zimmerman is guilty, Zimmerman is guilty. And I noticed it's all the same color cardstock and the same handwriting on the sign. So it's already looking, maybe they're working for the Department of Justice to keep this thing going a little bit longer. But I would be very, very surprised if there was any kind of a verdict before the first part of next week, and that means we're going to have a nice, calm, relaxing weekend, which I think we all really need. But again, regardless of the verdict, do not go along with that smelly kid that's wormed his way or her way into your group and is out there trying to say, we've got to riot for, well, whatever they say we've got to riot for. Obama, at the very least, is using this Zimmerman case to take the media and public focus off of the NSA gate, PRISM gate, DOJ gate, IRS gate, Benghazi gate, the deteriorating situation in all these wars of conquest that aren't conquering very much indeed, and certainly the continuing signs of an impending major disruption in the economy caused by this Ponzi scheme central bank that has to go. Apparently there's been a major train derailment in France near Paris. Many casualties. The infrastructure is collapsing everywhere. Every nation that's got private central banking. It's all rotting away because the money junkies don't want to spend money actually taking care of these lands they've conquered with their banking scheme. We are getting another report that now the level of cesium-137 at the Fukushima power station ruins has now soared 90-fold over what it was a week ago today. And again, this suggests very strongly that the remains of the fuel cores of those reactors have somehow deep underground collected together to a point where spontaneous fission is starting to occur, because cesium-137 is one of the products that will come out of that fission. And how long it's going to go, how hot it will go, is anybody's guess, and there isn't a darn thing they can do about it. Apparently that well down in the Gulf of Mexico that blew up, or rather is venting, they can't even get near it right now because of all the methane coming out of that. Another mess. All right, there's the music. Time to call it a weekend. Time to go off and run the errands we need to do on our Friday. We'll be back here Monday on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay well, stay skeptical, stay peaceful, make good choices. Please support Republic Broadcasting. We really do need your help to replace all this failing gear. And aloha, America.